In ancient Rome, when the Republic stood at the crossroads between its glorious past and an uncertain future, when the streets echoed with the tramp of legions returning from distant wars and the Senate chambers rang with impassioned debate about the nature of power and the price of freedom, in that turbulent time a great man fell, and with him fell the last hope of preserving the old order against the inexorable march of empire. This is not merely a tale of assassination and revenge, though it contains both in abundance. It is a meditation on the nature of power and ambition, on the difference between public good and private interest, on the question of whether noble ends can ever justify ignoble means. It is the story of men who loved Rome so deeply that they killed to save it, and in killing, destroyed the very thing they sought to preserve. The streets of Rome were decorated with garlands and banners on that February morning, the feast of Lupercal, when the people poured forth to celebrate Caesar's triumph. Julius Caesar had returned victorious once more, this time from a civil war against Pompey's sons, and the common folk rejoiced in their champion, their protector, the man who had given them bread and spectacles, who had conquered Gaul and crossed the Rubicon, who had risen from mere general to become the most powerful man in Rome. Yet not all celebrated. Two tribunes, Flavius and Marullus, walked among the crowds with stern disapproval, rebuking the commoners for their fickleness. "Wherefore rejoice?" they demanded. "What conquest brings he home? What tributaries follow him to Rome, to grace in captive bonds his chariot wheels? You blocks, you stones, you worse than senseless things. Have you forgot Pompey?" For these were the same citizens who once had climbed the walls and towers to catch a glimpse of Pompey in his triumphs, and now they decked the streets to celebrate the defeat of Pompey's sons. Such is the nature of popular favor, constant only in its inconstancy, faithful only until a stronger champion appears. Caesar himself moved through the crowd with the bearing of one who has grown accustomed to adulation, a man in his middle years, lean and commanding, his receding hair crowned with laurel. He was accompanied by his wife Calpurnia, by Mark Antony, his loyal friend and supporter, and by a gathering of senators and nobles, including Marcus Brutus and Cassius, whose thoughts were far darker than the festive atmosphere suggested. A soothsayer called out from the crowd, "Beware the Ides of March." Caesar paused, had the man brought before him. "What sayest thou to me now?" "Speak once again." "Beware the Ides of March," the old man repeated, his eyes grave with prophetic certainty. Caesar dismissed him with contempt. "He is a dreamer. Let us leave him." Pass, and the procession continued toward the games, while the soothsayer's warning hung in the air like smoke, unheeded by the man for whom it was intended. Brutus and Cassius lingered behind as the others went to watch the races. These two men represented different aspects of the conspiracy that was already forming. Brutus was a man of unimpeachable honor, descended from the ancient Brutus who had expelled the last king from Rome and established the Republic. He loved Caesar as a friend, but loved Rome more, and he was troubled by what he saw as Caesar's growing ambition, his seeming desire to be crowned king, a title that Romans had loathed since the days of the tyrannical Tarquins. Cassius was of a different temperament, lean and hungry-looking, as Caesar himself would later observe, a man who thought too much, and whose motives were perhaps not as pure as Brutus's. Cassius resented Caesar's supremacy, chafed at taking orders from a man he considered no better than himself, and sought to enlist Brutus in his conspiracy precisely because Brutus's reputation for honor would lend legitimacy to the act of assassination. "Tell me, good Brutus," Cassius said carefully, probing his friend's thoughts, "can you see your face?" "No, Cassius," Brutus replied, puzzled by the question, for the eye sees not itself, but by reflection, by some other things. "'Tis just," Cassius continued, his words calculated to plant seeds of doubt and ambition. "And it is very much lamented, Brutus, that you have no such mirrors as will turn your hidden worthiness into your eye, that you might see your shadow." Cassius spoke of Caesar with bitter eloquence, recounting instances of the great man's physical weaknesses, how Caesar had nearly drowned while swimming the Tiber, how he had suffered from fever and cried like a sick girl for water, how the epilepsy sometimes seized him in public view. "And this man is now become a god," Cassius said with contempt, "and Cassius is a wretched creature who must bend his body if Caesar carelessly, but not on him." But Brutus was not swayed by appeals to envy or personal grievance. His concern was for Rome itself, for the Republic and its institutions, for the principle that no man should stand above the law or hold power that belonged rightfully to the people and the Senate. If Caesar must die, it would be not from hatred, but from love of Rome, love of freedom, love of the republican virtues that had made Rome great. Shouts erupted from the games, and Brutus's face darkened. "I do fear the people choose Caesar for their king," he confessed, revealing that despite his affection for Caesar, the possibility of monarchy deeply troubled him. Do you fear it?" Cassius pressed. "Then must I think you would not have it so." "I would not, Cassius," Brutus admitted, "yet I love him well." It was this conflict between love and duty, between personal affection and political principle, that would define Brutus's tragedy. He was caught between competing loyalties, and the choice he would eventually make would destroy not only Caesar, but himself, and ultimately the republic he sought to save. Caesar returned from the games in an angry mood, and Brutus and Cassius learned from Casca what had transpired. Mark Antony had 3 times offered Caesar a crown, and 3 times Caesar had refused it, though each refusal seemed more reluctant than the last. The crowd had cheered the refusals, but also seemed disappointed, unsure whether they wanted a king or feared having one. "He fell down in the marketplace," Casca reported, describing one of Caesar's epileptic seizures, and foamed at mouth and was speechless. Caesar had played the scene perfectly, refusing the crown publicly while making clear his disappointment at the refusal, gauging the people's response, testing whether Rome was ready to accept what he increasingly seemed to desire. That night, a terrible storm descended upon Rome, a storm of such violence and supernatural character that even hardened men grew fearful. Lightning split the heavens with unnatural frequency. While strange portents appeared throughout the city, a lion walked the streets near the Capitol. Men on fire walked unburned through the roads. An owl hooted in the marketplace at noon. The very elements seemed in rebellion, as though nature itself protested against some coming violation of the natural order. Casca encountered Cicero, the great orator and senator, who remarked philosophically that men may construe things after their fashion, clean from the purpose of the things themselves. But Casca had already construed these omens as warnings of Caesar's dangerous ambition, and when Cassius found him, Casca was ready to join the conspiracy that was now forming in earnest. Cassius had been busy throughout the night winning over senators to his cause, but he knew that without Brutus the conspiracy lacked the moral authority it needed. "Oh, he sits high in all the people's hearts," Cassius acknowledged, "and that which would appear offense in us, his countenance, like richest alchemy, will change to virtue and to worthiness." The conspirators gathered at Brutus's house in the early hours before dawn. Cassius, Casca, Cinna, Decius Brutus, Metellus Cimber, and Trebonius, all men of standing, all senators, all convinced that Caesar must die if Rome was to remain free. They proposed taking an oath to bind themselves to their purpose, but Brutus rejected this. "No, not an oath. If not the face of men, the sufferance of our souls, the time's abuse, if these be motives weak, break off betimes, and every man hence to his idle bed." What other bond than secret Romans that have spoke the word and will not palter? And what other oath than honesty to honesty engaged, that this shall be, or we will fall for it? They debated whether Mark Antony should die with Caesar, for Antony was Caesar's most loyal supporter and would surely seek revenge. But again Brutus overruled them, insisting that their enterprise was not murder but sacrifice, not butchery but surgery, performed reluctantly on the body politic. Let's be sacrificers, but not butchers. Caius. We all stand up against the spirit of Caesar, and in the spirit of men there is no blood. Oh, that we then could come by Caesar's spirit and not dismember Caesar. But, alas, Caesar must bleed for it. And, gentle friends, let's kill him boldly, but not wrathfully. Let's carve him as a dish fit for the gods, not hew him as a carcass fit for hounds. As the conspirators departed to prepare for the assassination planned for the next day at the Senate, Brutus's wife Portia confronted him. She had noticed his troubled demeanor, his sleeplessness, his distraction, and she demanded to know what weighed so heavily upon him. Portia was herself of noble lineage, daughter of Cato, and she insisted that as Brutus's wife, she deserved to share his burdens. "I grant I am a woman," she said, "but withal a woman that Lord Brutus took to wife. I grant I am a woman, but withal a woman well reputed, Cato's daughter. Think you I am no stronger than my sex, being so fathered and so husbanded?" To prove her strength and discretion, she revealed that she had given herself a voluntary wound in the thigh, enduring the pain without complaint. Moved by this demonstration, Brutus promised to reveal his secrets when he could, though time pressed, and the conspirators' business could not wait. At Caesar's house, Calpurnia had passed a sleepless night, tormented by nightmares. She had dreamed of Caesar's statue spouting blood from 100 wounds, while smiling Romans bathed their hands in it. The supernatural events of the storm had shaken even her pragmatic nature, and she begged her husband not to go to the Senate that day. "Caesar, I never stood on ceremony," she said, referring to omens and portents, "yet now they fright me. There is one within, besides the things that we have heard and seen, recounts most horrid sights seen by the watch. A lioness hath whelped in the streets, and graves have yawned and yielded up their dead. Fierce fiery warriors fought upon the clouds in ranks and squadrons and right form of war, which drizzled blood upon the Capitol. The noise of battle hurtled in the air, horses did neigh, and dying men did groan, and ghosts did shriek and squeal about the streets. Caesar was moved by his wife's distress, and agreed to send Mark Antony to the Senate with word that he would not come. But Decius Brutus, one of the conspirators, arrived and cunningly reinterpreted Calpurnia's dream. This dream is all misinterpreted. It was a vision fair and fortunate. Your statue spouting blood in many pipes, in which so many smiling Romans bathed, signifies that from you great Rome shall suck reviving blood, and that great men shall press for tinctures, stains, relics, and cognizance. Moreover, Decius warned, the Senate had decided to offer Caesar a crown that day, and if he failed to appear, they might change their minds. The appeal to Caesar's ambition succeeded where Calpurnia's fears had not. Caesar resolved to go to the Senate after all, dismissing the warnings and portents, declaring that the valiant never taste of death but once. The morning of the Ides of March dawned bright and clear, the storm of the previous night having passed, leaving the city washed and gleaming in the spring sunlight. Caesar proceeded toward the Capitol, accompanied by the conspirators and other senators, moving through crowds of citizens who pressed forward to see him. Artemidorus, a teacher who had learned of the conspiracy, tried to give Caesar a scroll listing all the conspirators by name. "O Caesar, read mine first," he pleaded, "for mine's a suit that touches Caesar nearer." But Caesar, ever playing the role of the magnanimous leader who placed public affairs above personal concerns, refused. What touches us ourself shall be last served. The scroll that might have saved him was pushed aside, unread, and Caesar continued toward his doom. At the Capitol steps, the soothsayer appeared once more. "The Ides of March are come," Caesar observed, as if the passage of the date had disproved the prophecy. "Aye, Caesar," the old man replied gravely, but not calm. Inside the Senate chamber, the conspirators moved according to their plan. Metellus Cimber approached Caesar with a petition for his banished brother's return. When Caesar refused, the other conspirators crowded around, ostensibly to support the petition, but actually positioning themselves for the attack. They fell upon him with their daggers, striking again and again, while Caesar fought back with desperate strength. 23 wounds would later be counted on Caesar's body. But it was not these that killed him. It was the sight of Brutus among the assassins, of his friend whom he had loved and trusted, that broke Caesar's spirit. "Et tu, Bruti?" he asked in disbelief. "And you, Brutus?" before pulling his toga over his face and ceasing to resist. "Then fall Caesar," he said, and died at the base of Pompey's statue, the irony not lost on those who witnessed it. The conspirators stood over Caesar's body, their hands and arms bloody to the elbows, and for a moment they believed they had succeeded. Liberty. Freedom. Tyranny is dead, they cried. Run hence, proclaim, cry it about the streets. But the senators and citizens who witnessed the assassination had fled in terror, and the city descended into chaos. The conspirators had killed Caesar, but they had made no plans for what would follow. They had destroyed the man, but had no strategy for managing the power vacuum his death created. Brutus attempted to explain their actions to the gathering crowd in the forum. He spoke with eloquent sincerity about his love for Caesar and his greater love for Rome, about the necessity of preventing tyranny, about the sacrifice they had made for the good of the Republic. If there be any in this assembly, any dear friend of Caesar's, to him I say that Brutus's love to Caesar was no less than his. If then that friend demand why Brutus rose against Caesar, this is my answer: not that I loved Caesar less, but that I loved Rome more. Had you rather Caesar were living, and die all slaves, than that Caesar were dead, to live all freemen? As Caesar loved me, I weep for him. As he was fortunate, I rejoice at it. As he was valiant, I honor him. But as he was ambitious, I slew him. The crowd was moved by Brutus's words, his evident sincerity and nobility. They cheered him, declared him a hero, even suggested that he should be crowned Caesar in the dead man's place, missing entirely the irony that they now wanted to make a king of the man who had killed Caesar to prevent monarchy. But then Mark Antony took the rostrum, ostensibly to deliver a funeral oration for his fallen friend. The conspirators had debated whether to allow this, but Brutus had insisted it was only right, believing that Antony's speech would be harmless and that forbidding it would make them appear tyrannical. It was perhaps the greatest mistake of Brutus's life. "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears," Antony began, his voice thick with emotion. "I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them, the good is oft interred with their bones. So let it be with Caesar." He spoke with seeming deference to Brutus and the conspirators, repeatedly insisting that Brutus is an honorable man, yet with each repetition the phrase became more ironic, more laden with bitter sarcasm. He recounted Caesar's victories for Rome, his refusal of the crown, his bequest in his will of money to every Roman citizen, and his private gardens for public use. Here was a Caesar. When comes such another? Antony cried, and the crowd began to shift, their sympathy moving from the conspirators to the fallen Caesar. Antony showed them Caesar's blood-stained toga, pointed out each rent made by each conspirator's dagger, dwelt with particular emphasis on the wound made by Brutus, his most unkindest cut of all. "Oh, what a fall was there, my countrymen!" Antony lamented. "Then I and you and all of us fell down, whilst bloody treason flourished over us. Oh, now you weep, and I perceive you feel the dint of pity. These are gracious drops. Kind souls, what weep you when you but behold our Caesar's vesture wounded? Look you here. Here is himself, marred as you see with traitors." The crowd erupted in fury, demanding vengeance against the conspirators, crying out for blood to answer blood. They would burn the traitors' houses, kill them wherever they could be found. The mob mentality that had cheered Brutus mere moments before now bayed for his destruction, demonstrating once more the fickleness and dangerous volatility of popular opinion. In their rage, the crowd encountered Cinna the poet, an innocent man who shared a name with one of the conspirators, and tore him to pieces despite his protests that he was not Cinna the conspirator, but Cinna the poet. Tear him for his bad verses. they cried with savage humor, demonstrating how quickly civic order had collapsed into violent chaos. Brutus and Cassius fled Rome, raising armies in the eastern provinces to defend themselves against the forces of Mark Antony and Octavius, Caesar's adopted son and heir, who had returned to claim his inheritance and avenge his father's murder. The Republic, which the conspirators had killed Caesar to preserve, was now destroyed in civil war, as Romans once more took up arms against Romans. The triumvirate formed by Antony, Octavius, and Lepidus met to plan their strategy and to draw up proscription lists, names of those who would be killed and their property confiscated to fund the war. The cold calculation with which they traded lives revealed how far Rome had fallen from republican virtue. Antony casually agreed to the death of his own nephew in exchange for other concessions, demonstrating that personal loyalty now meant nothing beside political advantage. "These many, then, shall die," they agreed. "Their names are pricked." Even Cicero, the great orator and champion of the Republic, was marked for death, his eloquence deemed too dangerous to allow him to survive. The old order was being swept away entirely, replaced by naked power politics in which tradition, honor, and law counted for nothing beside the ability to command legions and eliminate rivals. The armies of the conspirators and the triumvirate finally met at Philippi in Macedonia. On the night before the battle, as Brutus sat reading in his tent, the ghost of Caesar appeared before him, whether as genuine supernatural visitation or as projection of Brutus's guilty conscience, we cannot say. "Why comest thou?" Brutus asked the apparition. "To tell thee thou shalt see me at Philippi," the ghost replied, and vanished. The Battle of Philippi was fought in 2 engagements, and both went badly for the conspirators. In the first clash, Brutus's forces routed Octavius's legions, but Antony crushed Cassius's wing. Cassius, believing all was lost and that Brutus had been defeated, ordered his servant Pindarus to kill him rather than be taken prisoner. He died believing the cause was lost, when in fact Brutus had won his part of the battle. When Brutus learned of Cassius's death, he mourned his friend, but also recognized that the loss was devastating to their cause. "O Julius Caesar, thou art mighty yet. Thy spirit walks abroad and turns our swords in our own proper entrails." The second battle ended in complete defeat for the conspirators. Rather than be captured and paraded through Rome in triumph, Brutus chose death. He ran upon his sword, held by his loyal servant Strato, declaring in his final words, "Caesar, now be still. I killed not thee with half so good a will." Mark Antony, finding Brutus's body, spoke over it with genuine respect. This was the noblest Roman of them all. All the conspirators save only he did that they did in envy of great Caesar. He only in a general honest thought and common good to all made one of them. His life was gentle, and the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, "This was a man." Octavius ordered that Brutus be given honorable burial, and the tragedy concluded with Rome firmly under the control of the triumvirate, though the future would see Octavius eliminate his rivals and become Augustus, the first emperor, ending the Republic forever and establishing the imperial system that would endure for 5 centuries. What are we to make of this tale of assassination and civil war, of noble intentions leading to catastrophic consequences, of a republic destroyed by those who sought to save it? The questions raised by Caesar's murder echo across the centuries. When is violence against a ruler justified? Can the ends ever justify the means? What happens when men of principle take the law into their own hands in the name of a higher good? Brutus killed Caesar not from hatred, but from love. Love of Rome, love of republican virtue, love of freedom. He acted from the highest motives, convinced that he was preventing tyranny and preserving liberty. Yet his action unleashed chaos and civil war, destroyed the republic he sought to save, and paved the way for the very imperial system he had killed to prevent. Was Caesar truly ambitious, truly seeking to become king and destroy the republic? Or was he merely a strong leader whom the times required, managing the transition from republic to empire that was already inevitable given Rome's vast territorial expansion. The play leaves this ambiguous, showing us Caesar through different eyes, as would-be tyrant to the conspirators, as beloved leader to the common people, as loyal friend to Antony, as aging husband to Calpurnia. Brutus's tragedy was to believe that killing one man could solve a systemic problem, that removing Caesar would restore the republic to its former virtue. But the republic was already dying before Caesar's rise to power. Decades of civil wars, political corruption, and the breakdown of traditional restraints had undermined the system beyond repair. Caesar was as much symptom as cause of Rome's transformation. The conspiracy itself was flawed from the beginning. The conspirators planned the assassination meticulously, but gave no thought to what would follow. They believed that once Caesar was dead, the republic would somehow spontaneously restore itself, that the people would rally behind them, that order would emerge naturally from their act of violence. This naivete proved their undoing. Brutus, for all his honor and nobility, was a poor politician. He allowed Antony to speak at Caesar's funeral, believing that fairness and reason would carry the day. He failed to understand that public opinion is swayed more by emotion than by logic, that timing and presentation matter more than the objective merits of an argument. Antony understood these things intuitively and used them to devastating effect. Cassius was more practical and worldly than Brutus, but he deferred to Brutus's judgment on crucial decisions because he needed Brutus's moral authority to legitimize the conspiracy. This created a situation where the least qualified person made the key strategic choices, leading inevitably to disaster. The common people of Rome demonstrated throughout the play their inconstancy and susceptibility to manipulation. They cheered Pompey and then Caesar. They celebrated Caesar and then approved his murder. They honored Brutus and then turned against him. They were not inherently corrupt or stupid, but they were easily swayed by rhetoric, hungry for spectacle, and more interested in bread and entertainment than in the abstract principles of republican governance. Mark Antony emerged as perhaps the most effective character in the play, not the most virtuous or the most principled, but the most successful at achieving his goals. He understood power, understood rhetoric, understood timing, and manipulation. He was not above using Caesar's death for his own advancement, but he also genuinely grieved his friend and genuinely sought revenge against the conspirators. The supernatural elements throughout the play, the soothsayer's warnings, the terrible storm, the ghost of Caesar, serve to suggest that there are forces beyond human control at work, that the conspirators were fighting against fate itself. Whether we interpret these elements literally or as manifestations of the characters' psychological states, they reinforce the sense that the assassination was not merely a political act, but a violation of natural order that the universe itself protested. Caesar's pride and dismissal of warnings contributed to his downfall, suggesting that even great men are vulnerable to the hubris that leads them to ignore danger signs. He dismissed the soothsayer, ignored Calpurnia's dream, refused to read Artemidorus's warning, not from stupidity, but from a desire to project strength and fearlessness, to maintain the image of invincibility that his position required. Brutus's soliloquies reveal a man tormented by doubt, trying to convince himself that what he is about to do is necessary and just. He cannot point to any specific act of tyranny by Caesar. He kills him for what he might become, not for what he has done. This preemptive violence, based on fear of future oppression rather than response to actual tyranny, raises uncomfortable questions about whether the conspirators were truly defending liberty or merely eliminating a rival power center. The friendship between Brutus and Caesar adds a deeply personal dimension to the political tragedy. Brutus's betrayal wounded Caesar more deeply than the daggers. Et tu, Brute? Contains more pain than any of his physical injuries. This betrayal by a friend is presented as the ultimate tragedy, worse than the loss of power or even life itself. As we reflect on this tale of ancient Rome, we cannot help but see its relevance to our own times. The questions it raises about power, about when resistance becomes justified, about the relationship between leaders and the people, about the fragility of democratic institutions and the ease with which they can be destroyed, these remain as urgent today as they were in Shakespeare's time or in Caesar's Rome. Republics and democracies do not fall to outside conquerors, but are destroyed from within, by citizens who love their faction more than their country, by leaders who seek personal power above public good, by the breakdown of the norms and traditions that hold society together, by the willingness of people to accept strongman rule in exchange for security or prosperity. Caesar was killed by men who claimed to defend the Republic, but their action destroyed it. This paradox, that defenders of liberty can become its destroyers, is one of history's recurring themes. Violence, once unleashed in the name of a righteous cause, cannot be easily controlled or directed. It creates its own momentum, sweeps away the distinctions between just and unjust causes, and ultimately consumes those who initiated it. Brutus died believing he had acted rightly, that history would vindicate him, that future generations would honor him as a liberator. But history remembers him as the betrayer of Caesar, the man whose noble intentions paved the road to civil war and empire. His tragedy was to be judged not by his motives, but by his consequences, not by what he intended, but by what he achieved. The play ends with the victory of Antony and Octavius, with the conspirators dead and the Republic effectively finished. Order has been restored, but it is the order of imperial power, not republican liberty. The future belongs to emperors, not to the Senate, and the old system of checks and balances, of shared power and civic virtue, has been swept away forever. Yet Antony's tribute to Brutus suggests that nobility of character still matters, that even in a world of naked power politics, there is value in acting from principle rather than from self-interest. Brutus failed in his aims, but he retained his honor. He was mistaken, but not corrupt, tragic, but not contemptible. Perhaps this is the ultimate lesson of the play, that nobility of character is worth preserving even when it leads to failure, that acting from principle matters even when the consequences are disastrous, that how we conduct ourselves in pursuit of our goals is as important as whether we achieve them. The Ides of March have long passed now, and Julius Caesar's blood has dried on the stones of the Senate floor. The republic he dominated and the conspirators who killed him are all dust, and the empire that rose from their conflict has itself fallen into history. But the questions raised by his assassination remain alive. How should power be exercised? When does strong leadership become tyranny? What are the limits of legitimate resistance? Can violence ever serve the cause of justice? These questions have no simple answers, which is why the story of Caesar's assassination continues to resonate across the centuries. It is a tale of flawed human beings making choices in impossible circumstances, of good intentions leading to terrible outcomes, of the gap between what we intend and what we achieve growing into a chasm that swallows everything we value. As the Roman night deepens and the stars wheel overhead in their eternal patterns indifferent to the chaos and bloodshed below, we remember those who played their parts in this great tragedy. Caesar, ambitious and proud, killed at the moment of his greatest triumph. Brutus, noble and principled, destroyed by his own idealism. Cassius, envious and resentful, dead by his own hand in mistaken despair. Antony, clever and ruthless, triumphant in the moment but facing his own eventual downfall. And Calpurnia, that voice of wisdom and foreboding whose warnings went unheeded, left to mourn a husband who chose pride over prudence. The crowd disperses from the forum, the blood is washed from the stones, and life in Rome continues under new masters. The machinery of empire grinds forward, indifferent to the ideals that the conspirators died defending. The Republic has fallen, but perhaps it was already dead before Caesar's assassination, killed not by any single act, but by the slow erosion of civic virtue, by decades of civil war, by the impossibility of governing a vast empire through institutions designed for a small city-state. And somewhere in the collective memory of humanity, the ghost of Caesar walks still, reminding us that actions have consequences we cannot foresee, that violence begets violence, that the deaths of great men leave voids that lesser men rush to fill, and that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, not just against tyrants, but against our own certainty that we alone know what justice requires, and that the ends we seek justify whatever means we choose to employ. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, Cassius had said, trying to rouse his friend to action. He was right. Our fates are determined by our choices, not by destiny or supernatural forces. But he failed to understand that recognizing this responsibility should make us more cautious, not less, more willing to consider consequences rather than acting on principle alone, more humble about our ability to foresee the results of our actions. The Ides of March came, and Caesar fell, and with him fell the last vestiges of the Roman Republic. The soothsayer's warning proved true, but knowing the future did not prevent it. Perhaps this is the deepest tragedy, that we can see disaster approaching, yet cannot avoid it, that character and circumstance combine to create outcomes that no one desired and everyone regrets. Thus ends this tale of ancient Rome, of assassination and civil war, of noble intentions and catastrophic consequences, of a republic destroyed by those who sought to save it. The lessons it teaches are written in blood on the stones of history, and we ignore them at our peril. For the story of Julius Caesar is not merely history, but prophecy, not merely the past, but a mirror held up to every age, asking us to consider carefully before we act, to weigh consequences before embracing causes, and to remember always that the road to tyranny is often paved with the very violence that claims to defend liberty.